Hey everyone, welcome to the Deep Drive podcast. My name's Jake. Again, here with my friend Dante, and we are closing out our Trust the Process series where we've spent 4 weeks in an Old Testament book called Ruth. And as a recap, there were really 3 big themes that we wanted to look at through this study. Number 1, Ruth is about ordinary people in ordinary circumstances, and yet God is extraordinarily involved in their life. And if that's true about Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, then it might be true about us as well. Second thing is that Ruth is about the providence of God, that he's always working in our lives in big ways and small ways, whether we see them or not. So often we look for the big moments, the writing in the sky moments, and in reality, God's often working through the small moments and the ordinary moments. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then finally, that Ruth is all about Jesus. And if you got to be here this weekend, you got to see the direct connection of Ruth the Moabite, thousands of years before, to Jesus Christ himself. And it's truly an incredible story. And so one of the things about the book of Ruth is we use that word ordinary just to recognize how relatable it is. Yeah. And we're often looking for a voice from heaven. We're looking for an angel in my living room. We're looking for the clouds to form a message in the sky. And so often God is using very ordinary circumstances to get our attention. And so Dante, how have you seen that in your life to where it wasn't like a massive breakthrough? It was in the ordinary moment that God really got your attention and was showing you what he was doing.
Yeah, I love that thought, because even, when you read the Bible, you often want the burning bush moment. Like, my life would be so much easier if I woke up and that was real. Like, God himself came down and told me exactly what to do.
To be clear, that would be the wildest thing in the world. A burning bush talking to you, not burning up. I hope I would have hung in there like Moses, but I'm not totally sure I would have.
Probably would have ran. Keep my shoes on, and I'm out of here. So sometimes you want that, and the reality is, I think for most of us, the ordinary is where God works. And in my own life, I remember working in sports. I had been there. I knew there was something else out there. I knew God wanted something else from me, but nobody was going to call and say, hey, I think you're looking for a ministry job, and I just happen to have one. I actually had to take steps, and I remember taking steps to look for new jobs, and I got back into my same old habits of sports jobs in LA. I was, I don't know why I don't want to do any of those. And it was just like, because I think there's something better for you. And I said, all right, let me just try this ministry jobs. And that's actually how I got to Real Life, seeing the comms director role at a church, which I didn't know existed. So it was a great bridge for me to come from sports, marketing, advertising to church in a comms role. But if I had never taken the step to do the ordinary thing, to look for jobs, to begin to seek out, I would have never been here, never gotten that. And so a lot of times I think we're looking for this spectacular thing, and we do hear stories of God working in that way. But for most of us, it is in the daily grind, the daily day-to-day things that we can do that I think really get us there.
So God can work through Indeed.com.
He can.
An online job search, you never know. Last week, Trudy and I were going to go to dinner, and we were going to try the new Yard House over here by the mall. And of course, it was like 3 days old, so the thing is just packed. I mean, we get there, and they say 45 minutes, and we're like, we will see you in 3 weeks when this is no longer this crowded. So now we're in that, we hadn't thought about the backup plan, and we're just kind of scrambling. And we know Cheesecake Factory is across the street. Now, what you're about to hear in the next 30 seconds is not going to be a commercial for Cheesecake Factory. I am not a big Cheesecake Factory guy.
Too big of a menu.
The menu, there's no way that you're good at all of this. You cannot be good at chicken parm and carne asada at the same place.
People try to convince me it's all fresh back there, and I'm like, there's no way.
Not a chance. Not a chance. So anyway, we go because we really didn't have a great plan, and we sit down, and our waitress comes over, and she gives that look that you and I get every once in a while. Like, she clearly thinks that I might be the pastor at Real Life. And eventually she asks, and she's like, do you go to real life? I was like, yeah, I go. And we get to talking, and she says, she's been here since the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like she knew Kyle, she knew Rusty. She actually talked about how handsome Kyle was, and she did not talk about how handsome I am. So I don't know why she felt very comfortable making that observation. But we were able to talk, and we were able to connect, and we were able to encourage her. She was encouraging us about everything that's happening at the church. And it was like, all right, we just weren't supposed to eat at Yard House. We were supposed to be at Cheesecake Factory. It's cool that these things happen. And sometimes it's on a dinner date. Sometimes it's on an online job search. But if you have read the book of Ruth, there is not a mention of anything that we would call supernaturally miraculous. Right. No water turned into blood. No person was healed. No person started walking. It from the outside, honestly, I don't even know that their neighbors would have seen the life of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz and said, that is supernaturally miraculous. That is God orchestrating all that. It kind of looked like a young lady found a husband and started a family, and now good for them. Yeah. But what we see behind the scenes is that God was working in the whole time. And so I don't want anyone listening today saying my life just doesn't sound cool. It doesn't make the front page of anything. It's not going to trend on TikTok. Your ordinary moment very well could be what God was setting up the whole time. So please do not dismiss his role in your life because it's not as spectacular as other people. One thing that we did acknowledge is that you get to the end of Ruth and you got Naomi's holding her grandson. Ruth and Boaz are married. We get to see their family redeemed and restored. Everybody's eaten. Everybody's happy. And it feels like this really nice bow at the end of the story of, man, good for that family. And we acknowledge this weekend that sometimes it's hard to watch other people's happy ending when you're in the middle of the struggle. And so how have you handled it in seasons of ambiguity, in seasons of frustration, of loss? How are you able to celebrate with people when their life is going well, even when your life doesn't feel like it's going very well?
Yeah, I think for me, it was a lot of, I knew how I wanted my life to go. I had the plan. By the time I'm 30, this, and that. And when it doesn't happen, it blows you by. And I think for most of us, I don't know too many people who had the plan and it went exactly to plan. But the reality, I think, for all of us is that we have these ups and downs in our life. And the word that just keeps coming to me is trust. As we said, I trust that God sees farther than I do. I trust that God knows more than I do. I trust that God has a bigger plan than what I can even imagine. And so in seasons where I'm not feeling like it's going my way, I trust that it's going God's way. I trust that he's got something that he's working on behind the scenes. He's moving the pieces. And when I do that, then when other people get what they've been praying for, they get the thing that they've been asking for, I ought to be willing to celebrate that God stepped into their life and showed up in a great way. And I heard a pastor once say it, if somebody on your street got blessed, you ought to be happy because God's in your neighborhood. And it was just this reminder of God's still there, God's still working, and it may not have come to pass for me, but I'm trusting that sooner or later that God's going to knock on my door and do the thing that I've been praying for.
It's really good. Just because God bless someone else doesn't mean he's abandoned your story. But in the middle of it, it's really hard. I've shared before that in Treaty and I, as we were growing our family, we went through some loss. We lost a couple pregnancies. And in that season where you're grieving your own loss, and then watching all of your peers with birth announcements and gender reveals, and it's not that you're not happy for them, but it's almost like a reminder of what you don't have or what it hasn't gone well for you. And it is an opportunity to make a choice of, do I still trust God? Do I still believe he's good, even if this isn't the plan? We heard a quote this weekend from an older English pastor named Charles Spurgeon that said, if you can't trace God's hand, then you're going to have to trust his heart. Yeah. If you can't see clearly what he's doing in the moment, you're going to have to lean back on your experience of when he was good, when he did provide, when he did come through. You're going to have to trust his character and trust his heart. And essentially, That's why, and maybe if you're new to church, you've kind of wondered why we take communion every week. And not every church does that. There are different church traditions that have different rhythms. And for me, one of the reason I'm grateful for the frequency is that it is a weekly reminder of why I can trust God.
Yeah.
Is that if He did that, if He sent His Son to the cross, if that is the crux of everything that we believe, then it can increase my trust. And in those moments of doubt where I'm not sure that He knows what He's doing, I'm not sure that He heard my prayer, I'm not sure that He got my 3-point plan that I submitted through the portal, then when I remember what He did on the cross, that can reinforce the trust when I can't trace His hand. And so that's the whole spirit of the book of Ruth. And so Dante, let me ask you this question. When we are waiting, what are some of the key habits that we can develop as we're waiting for His plan? We've talked a little bit this weekend about how the providence of God doesn't mean we sit back and just wait for Him to deliver. Ruth showed up and worked in the field. Naomi strategized about how to get in front of Boaz. Boaz went to the city gates and he presented shrewdly the case to the other kinsman redeemer. This was an active family that was doing stuff as God was providing for them. So as you're waiting, what are the key habits that have helped you stay locked in, trusting God's heart as you wait patiently for His providence?
Yeah, I think the three that we always, and I'll probably never get tired of saying, but it's reading your Bible, it's prayer, it's community, right? Those are the three big ones. And at Real Life, we stress those because they're so important to your spiritual growth. But outside of those things, I think there is trying to identify what is the next best step? What is the next right step that I can take that gets me closer to what I'm asking God for? It just gets me, I deal with folks who are struggling with depression, and sometimes they sort of hibernate, and the question I always ask, what could you do that you're not being reclusive? Like, well, I can go take a walk, right? There's things that we can do that help us get a little bit closer to the goal that we want. And so outside of the big three, reading your Bible, praying, and then finding good community, I think it's trying to identify the next best step, the next good thing that I can do that's going to get me a little bit closer to the goal that I want to take. And in this story, I think we see that with each of them is they're still doing the thing. They're still going to work. They're still identifying the place where they ought to be.
Yeah. This waiting season where you're not sure when God's going to do the thing that you're pretty sure He's going to do, or you felt like He told you He was going to do. It doesn't just reveal what we believe in, but it also shapes who we become. And I'll just kind of end with this story. Our family helped plant a church in Santa Barbara, and that means moving into a place and trying to start something from scratch and doing all these things. And we had dreams and we had plans. And honestly, it never really came to what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And I had these really dark nights of the soul of like, well, does that mean that I suck? Does that mean that I'm a bad leader? Does that mean I'm a bad teacher? If I was more dynamic, if I was more charismatic, then more people would want to be a part of this. And there were long Sunday afternoons after we were set up in teardown. And so we would close that truck door. Yeah. And then I would just like stare at the sky of like, what are we doing? What am I why isn't this what I thought it was going to be? And in those moments, I was genuinely praying, God, like, will you save me from what you've called me to? Like, I felt that level of desperation of, will you relieve me of the thing that I'm almost confident that you want me to be doing because I can't do this any longer. And what it did is it exposed how much of my identity was in my performance and how much of my identity was in people's appreciation of me and whether I was getting a round of applause or people were grateful for what I was doing. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I had not gone through that season and God hadn't unearthed all those things, I would not be ready to be in the role that He has me in right now as leading Real Life, because this season has been really incredible as a church. And I know that if I hadn't set up and tore down, if I hadn't been disappointed in myself for almost 4 years straight, if I hadn't had to go to the work of finding out where my identity really is, I would take way too much credit for what's going well. I would think I was smart. I would think I was the reason that some of these things were happening. And I am so clearly aware that is not the case. But I want you to know that like that season of 4 to 5 years of almost constant disappointment, mostly in myself, not in other people, mostly in myself, led to me learning what was true about me, what I hadn't grown into yet with God, and now has set me up to be able to lead in a place of humility and gratitude at Real Life, which I'm still a massive work in progress. I'm far from done, but I needed to be worn out in a season to be ready for this one. And so this is a message of encouragement that if that season sounds really familiar to you as you're going through life right now, you feel tired, you feel frustrated, you feel like you are supposed to be doing more or different or better. Is it possible that God has you in a season of preparation where he's working some things out that if he just fast forwarded you to the final outcome, you wouldn't be ready for? And he is not only revealing things to you, but he's shaping you in this season so that he can use you in the future. So like we said this weekend, I just don't want you to give up. Don't give up right before God's providence kicks in. Don't give up before the story becomes clear. Keep going, keep praying, keep showing up. And then one day God will show what he's been up to the whole time. This study has been so good for me. I know it's been good for so many people in the church. I love God's word, and I love how it teaches us and shapes us all these years later. Excited for this week as we jump into a different book of the Bible. We are going to jump to the New Testament for the next few weeks into a letter written by a guy named James. Dante, let me ask you, what would it take for you to believe that your sibling was the son of God? Was there any chance that your sibling could have ever convinced you that that was true? Because that's what James was up against. What would it have taken for your brother to have convinced you of that?
Not a chance. There's just not.
I think it might be one of the most convincing parts of Jesus's divinity is that if you can convince your brother that you're God, you really are God. That was the hurdle that James had to get over. We're going to read his letter as it helps us understand what it means to put faith into action. Excited to live in that for the next few weeks, and we will see you either on campus or online, and we'll see you back here for the next Deep Drive.